This is the DJI Action number 3, and in this video we're going to go through what's new with this camera, and I'll compare it to the DJI Action 2 because these cameras are very similar. However, DJI has redesigned the Action line to be more like the original Action 1. Alright, let's get into it. So the first thing that you're going to notice right away is that the DJI Action 3 is just like the original Action. The Action 2 was completely redesigned to be this like small compact camera. However, the Action 3 goes back to the original design, and that has a big screen on the back and a small screen on the front so you can see yourself when you're doing vlog-like style filming. And both of these screens are touch screens so that you can change your settings while you're out filming. Now, I came out here to the mountains to film this video and to test this camera in a few different scenarios, because out here I have a wide range of lighting between the bright sunlight and the dark shades of the mountain, especially in the early morning, and now I have clouds coming in as well. So this camera was designed for action and adventure. It's more rugged than the previous models. So this camera is meant to be taken out into some extreme environments. Now I'm going to switch over to the Action 3 as these clouds roll in, just so you can hear what the audio sounds like coming directly from camera. Now you can input a microphone if you want to use something like the DJI mic and have wireless audio, but for the purposes of just understanding how this sounds, I'm going to use the camera audio. So I'm going to put all the specs up here on the screen. This camera can shoot 4K 120 frames per second. It's got a 1 1/7 inch sensor. It's got rock steady and horizon balancing up to 45 degrees. And the new rugged design is better to withstand cold, and it also is better for going underwater. You can go much deeper with this camera than previous models. And it has a field of view of 155 degrees, so it's similar to like a 12mm lens. Now, if you compare this side by side with the DJI Action 2, well, these specs are almost identical. So it's basically the same camera that you're getting in the Action 2, however, it's rehoused with a better battery life, better weatherproofing, and also the big thing that's coming is that the Action 3 is going to be able to shoot 10-bit. And that's huge for action cameras because 10-bit gives you more flexibility when it comes to color grading. So you'll be able to push the footage around a little bit more in this camera than you've been able to in previous models. Now, I haven't been able to test it out yet, but I'm excited for the release, and I'm definitely going to have to do some testing when it does come out, because on the DJI Mini 3 Pro, DJI added 10-bit to that, and it's so much easier to work with than the 8-bit file that you normally have on that size of drone. And the same thing with an action camera. It's going to be so much easier to work with this footage when you have that 10-bit file, so you can do a little bit more with your color grading. Now, if you're not someone who's into color grading and you just want to shoot and just use the footage right out of camera, well, this camera also has a great look to it. And you can see from this footage here, you can get great shots, even without color grading, just with the color that's coming straight out of this camera. But let me show you a side-by-side of these two cameras so you can see the footage, even though all the specs are pretty much the same. Now, just hand-holding, this is the Action 2, just so you can get a reference of what this looks like with this kind of scene where camera's facing yourself. I'm using the little bottom unit, so right now I'm looking at the bottom screen, so you can kind of see how eyeline looks when you're looking at that screen. So this is the Action 3. I am looking at the side screen, one right next to the lens, so you can see the difference of where your eyeline is depending on which camera you're using. But same settings, completely auto, same direction I'm walking, so you can get a sense of how these are side by side. And this is the Action 3. Here is the side by side view, both these cameras stacked next to each other. This is all auto, shooting in 4K 30. Now the big change between both of these cameras besides 10-bit is the size. The Action 2 has this small design where it has internal memory and an internal battery. Now that's good and bad, because if you're using this camera for longer periods of time, you have to attach the battery unit or the screen unit to charge this camera, which could be frustrating depending on the situation that you're filming in. I know when I'm out filming, I just want a simple design, and the original Action has this more simple design. And with the Action kit, you get 3 batteries, and they come in this charging case, which is very similar to the cases that you get when you have the DJI mic. It's this flip up case, and it fits them all nicely. One thing that DJI really excels at is their design features of all the new products coming out. Everything is just much more functional and easier to use. So when you're out filming, you only have to take this, the 3 batteries in the battery case, so you don't have batteries floating around, and then the mounts. And the cool thing about the Action 3 is the way that the mounts work. So the Action 3 has adopted the mount design from the Action 2. So instead of having the 2 prongs on the actual camera itself, it's using the same magnetic clip system that was developed for the Action 2. Now personally, I like this system because it uses a magnet and then 2 clips to attach the camera to all the mounts. So when you're out filming, you can have different mounts for different objects, and it's easy to switch the camera from one to the next. And I don't have to go through and actually untwist the camera and then put it back on the other mount and twist on. It's a small thing, but it does make a difference. Now, as you've been seeing from all this footage I've been showing you in this video, you can get great shots with this camera in a variety of settings. You have photo, you have video, you have time-lapse, you have hyperlapse, you have slow motion, you have 4K 120 frames per second, and it's sharp. And everything just looks good when it comes to actually filming in these settings. But let's go over how this camera functions so you could see how DJI has updated the design and just made it a lot easier to use. So everything's done through swipes on the screen. You can swipe down, you could swipe up, you can swipe left, you could swipe right. And when you swipe down, you have all of your menus, and you have this little profile in the upper left-hand corner. When you click this, you can have custom profiles for different styles of shooting. So if you know that you shoot in the same way over and over, just set them up here in your custom, and then you'll have to go through and mess with your settings later. Now you can turn everything on or off, whether it's the screen brightness, the little recording lights that pop on, or the orientation flip. So if you don't want to have it flip orientation when you're filming, you can turn all that off in the menu. Everything is very customizable on this camera to fit exactly how you're going to shoot. So when we swipe up, you'll see all the camera settings. You can shoot all the way up to 4K 4.3 at 60 frames per second, or 4K 16:9 at 120 frames per second. Now, when you're using 120 or 100 frames per second, you can't do horizon balancing. You can only use rock steady. So what horizon balancing does is it's gonna keep your horizon completely level no matter what you're shooting. So if you rotate your camera left or right, well, the horizon's always gonna be level. So it's gonna have this much smoother feel to it than seeing the camera kind of shift left and right. Now this camera has Rocksteady 3.0, which is just gonna make your footage stable. However, you will see that horizon shift if you're moving the camera left or right. And there are times where you might wanna see that. You don't always necessarily wanna use the horizon balancing. But personally, when I'm out shooting, I've been filming most of this with horizon balancing on. It's gonna crop in a little bit on the footage. However, you are gonna always have this perfectly level shot. Now, when you swipe right on the screen, this is where you access all your pro settings or set everything to auto. So in the upper right-hand corner, you can turn on and off your pro settings, and then you have access to change your exposure to manual and be able to adjust your shutter speed and ISO. You could also take off auto white balance, and then you could also change your color to Decine-like. So Decine-like is gonna give you a little bit flatter profile so you can color grade later. And it's gonna allow the shadows to not get as dark and the highlights to not get as bright so that you can have more of a creative color grade when you're editing your footage. Now, when 10-bit's available in this camera, it's gonna be a lot easier to color grade as well. And then there's also the ability to change your field of view. You can have the de-warp setting, which is gonna be like a standard setting so you don't see any of that bubble effect. There's gonna be a wide, so it's gonna have some of that bubble effect, but it's not gonna be crazy wide. And then you have ultra wide, which is gonna be the widest field of view. Okay, so I've switched over to the ultra wide, and you can see just by hand holding this camera, how close my fingers are just on the edge, and there you can see them in the shot. So you're getting a super wide shot. You can only use rock steady in the ultra wide, but you're still gonna get a stable shot. Now on the side of this camera, there's a quick shot button. So you can click this and you could change your quick shot settings so that you don't have to go into all of your menus. So it's a physical button that you press, which I think is gonna be a lot better so that you can set up your settings before you go out and shoot, and then have your quick settings already set and just use this button on the side to switch between a few settings. Because when you're out doing something like snowboarding in the cold, it's gonna be tough to use this screen, especially if it's wet. And so having the additional quick settings button on the side does make this more usable in the different settings that you might find yourself using this in. Now, one thing that's also really cool, when you're shooting in 120 frames per second, you can use the super wide field of view. You're not limited to like the narrow field of view when you're shooting in higher frames per second. And this is what vlogging looks like when you're in the ultra wide using Rocksteady. You can see how much wider this shot is. Now the lens on this camera is removable, so you just screw it on and off. It's much easier than a GoPro, and it's much better than the Action 2 where it was just a magnet on and off. This is a screw mount, and so it's easy to put on ND filters or like a polarizing filter depending on the scene that you're shooting in. Now also the battery has a long life and it works in cold environments. Now I haven't had a chance to test in super cold environments. However, I've been hiking up this mountain and I went to the summit, came over here, I've been shooting a bunch of stuff, doing all this A-roll, getting just some B-roll shots, and I'm still on one battery. So I have the other two batteries, but I haven't actually had to use them yet, which on the Action 2, you would have to switch battery by now. Just my experience, it's not like a super scientific test, but half the day hiking and battery's still good. It's getting towards the end, but still pretty solid. So when I pick up a camera to take out with me on an adventure, Action 3 makes a lot of sense. Now next, make sure you check out this video right here, which goes through how I actually use an action camera to craft a vlog with a story. I used the DJI Action 2 to film a story from start to end, and I go through all of my methods on how I use such a small camera to build more of a story-driven piece. I'll see you over there.